Okay, so we got energy here, and we're going to first start with a chloroplast, but I'm going to do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Before I get into what is actually happening here, let's identify a couple things. This is going to be a water molecule with H2O. So this is going to be a hydrogen made up of a proton and an electron, another proton and electron, and oxygen is the red. So other things we have here, this is our chloroplast, this is our thylakoid membrane, these are going to be chlorophyll, this is a pump, and this is NADP reductase, an enzyme that's going to help make NADPH. These guys flying around here are just free protons, or hydrogen ions. These little trucks here are going to transport electrons along with some protons, and these are going to be NADPH. This is ATP synthase, an enzyme that acts as a channel to allow protons out, but as that happens, we're going to take the energy and store it in the bond of ATP. So this is ADP, two P's, with another free phosphate group here. This is going to represent carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is CO2, but all I'm showing here is the carbon. So when we are doing photosynthesis, we need to bring in water and carbon dioxide, and there's two main stages that we're going to talk about here. This initial stage is the light-dependent reactions, and the light-dependent reactions begin by breaking down water. So water breaks down into oxygen and electrons and protons. So the electrons go to the chlorophyll, and the protons stay within the thylakoid. So at this point, energy from light hits the chlorophyll and energizes the electrons. And then another molecule will shuttle them over to the pump. The electrons power the pumps and push protons inside the thylakoid membrane, inside the thylakoid. These electrons now are losing energy, and at the second chlorophyll, which is part of photosystem 1, light energy hits it, re-energizes the electrons, and these high energy electrons can be picked up by a truck. This enzyme is like a loading dock, and this NADP plus can pick up an electron, and it's a proton, and it'll become NADPH. That's what's happening here. So now those are going to go to the Calvin cycle, but we're not quite done yet. We now have a very high concentration of hydrogen ions or protons inside the thylakoid. They're going to want to diffuse back out. So as they diffuse out through ATP synthase, that motion of them going out is going to generate ATP. So enzymes help catalyze chemical reactions. So this enzyme is going to make ATP, like so. So now we have ATP, we have NADPH, and we have carbon dioxide. So as far as the Calvin cycle goes, it's a complex series of reactions, and in this whole process, what we're just focusing on is that carbon dioxide comes in as a reactant and it produces glucose. So we're taking these carbon dioxides, and in the Calvin cycle, it gets involved with, takes high energy electrons from the NADPH. We fuse together all of these carbon dioxides. We take energy from ATP, high energy electrons from NADPH, and we end up with glucose. Glucose is C6H12O6. So obviously it doesn't look like this, but this model is meant to show you that there are 6 carbons, but we also have hydrogen and energy stored in the bonds. This will now be used in cellular respiration to generate ATP. So the ATP that's made through the light-dependent reactions, that energy gets transferred into sugar. So then when the sun isn't shining and it's at night, plants still need ATP, and they're going to generate their ATP through breaking down glucose or sugars. So now this is leaving the chloroplast, and we are going to enter the world of cellular respiration. In the cytosol, we begin to break down sugar. So the first stage of cellular respiration, and there's 3 stages, is glycolysis. Glycolysis is simply splitting the sugar. As we do glycolysis, we will generate a small amount of ATP, and we will carry some high energy electrons to the electron transport chain over here inside our mitochondria. So our mitochondria here has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. The NADH from NAD plus can go in here, carry this energy, this high energy electron, to the pumps. Now our 2 pyruvates are going to diffuse into the inner mitochondrial matrix, and those pyruvates will be turned into acetyl-CoA and then enter the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is a process of taking acetyl-CoA and breaking it down into carbon dioxide. That process of breaking down and producing carbon dioxide is going to generate a little ATP, and we're also going to get lots and lots and lots of electrons. Those electrons, I'm just showing one, those electrons will be carried by NADH and FADH2, and they're going to take them to the pumps. At the pumps, high energy electrons are dropped off. Those electrons power the pumps, which push protons or hydrogen ions to the intermembrane space. So the NADs and FADs are dropping off the electrons. Electrons power the pumps, protons get pumped, and now they're going to be in high concentration here. They're going to diffuse back into the matrix through ATP synthase, and as we do that, we will generate ATP. This is where the vast majority of all of the ATP is produced in cellular respiration. If there are 36 ATP molecules produced, 32 of them will be produced in the electron transport chain. So I'm just showing one molecule of ATP here, but because of all the electrons that are being transported through the breakdown of sugar, we're going to have a tremendous amount of ATP generated right here from our high energy electrons. So we get our ATP. Finally though, we have oxygen. Oxygen is going to remove the electrons from the pumps. If there is no oxygen available, we cannot continue to generate ATP with our mitochondria, because the electrons would stay on the pumps and create a backlog where the NADs and FADs could not drop off electrons. So the oxygen comes, cleans up the electrons, grabs a couple protons, and now we are back to water with oxygen and 2 hydrogen molecules. So, way back here with photosynthesis, we started with water. At the end of cellular respiration, we end with water. Here, oxygen is produced as water breaks down. Here, oxygen was the reactant that made water. Over here, we ultimately take in carbon dioxide, produce the sugar. In cellular respiration, the sugar breaks down ultimately into carbon dioxide. So the reactant here would be glucose, the product is carbon dioxide. And then we can use ATP for energy to do things within the cell. For example, active transport, or muscle contraction, or helping move things around from place to place with kinesins and stuff like that. And that's energy.